On a bitterly cold night in January 1439, the Dieu was lying silently at anchor, surrounded by 3 smaller royal ships. The story goes that this huge royal battleship was struck by lightning and burnt to the water. Strangely enough, the other ships weren't damaged. Nearly 600 years later, the skeleton of a huge ship is still visible on the bottom of the river. John Adams, who was one of the leading archaeologists on the Mary Rose, has no doubt this is the Dieu.
We're going to put a trench over the stern and look at a part of the structure that we think most information is going to come from in the time available to us.
On a practical note, how the hell are we going to get the dirt out?
Well, we're going to excavate essentially just as you do on land, with trowels, paintbrushes, etc. But we'll suck the spoil away with a water suction dredge, and that has the effect of keeping the visibility a little bit clearer.
Henry V was the most powerful king in Europe after defeating the French at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. In just one day, the English wiped out most of the French nobility. Even though Agincourt was the last great land battle of the 100 Years' War, the French and their powerful allies, the Genoese, posed a continual threat on the seas with their huge warships called carracks. Henry V kept his royal navy here in the Hamble River. Unlike Southampton, which had been raided several times by the Genoese, the Hamble was a safe anchorage, protected from the invaders by a chain across the river mouth. So we are looking for an enormous ship. She carried a fighting force of at least 200 men, and we think her forward castle, or forecastle, was 50 feet above the waterline. That's 3 times the height of a double-decker bus. But as our experts can't agree about most of the other dimensions, one of our targets is to define her actual size. But why did they build her so big?
It had to be larger than the largest ship the enemies of England could throw against it. And those were the Genoese carracks, the big Mediterranean sailing vessels of the allies of the French. And the Dieu is about 3 times as large as the largest carrack.
We think that at least 17 ships of Henry V's Royal Navy were maintained and overhauled at Bursledon, a mile towards the sea from our site. Stuart would like to know more about this busy village in the time of Henry V. With so much royal business, Bursledon docks must have been a focal point for trade. If Stuart can locate the medieval shoreline, then he can begin to piece together the layout of the ancient port. The tides in the river churn up all sorts of silt and weed, and the underwater visibility is very poor, so John has designed a special enclosure. This paddling pool-looking device is called the sea curtain. Once anchored over the trench, the sides can be let down and secured to form a tank. The water inside can then be pumped out through a filter and returned into the enclosure, clear of silt. Well, that's the theory, but it's already taken half the day just to inflate it and get it in the water. It's just after lunch and the tide is slowing down. John's getting ready to dive.
Chin up just a little bit, mate. Yeah, in, fingers.
Everything else is ready. Each diver has a companion on standby in case there's a problem.
Contents gauge. Carabiner. Suit inflation. You okay? Get diver in the water, please.
But there's little point in Phil and I taking the place of the 2 working divers until the visibility is far better and they've started to uncover the wreck.
Left surface.
John has chosen to dig across the stern of the ship in a trench about 2 by 2.5 metres. The depth of water at the moment is only 2 metres, but the tide's still running. The visibility is extremely poor, and there's a huge amount to get ready before the serious archaeology can begin. John's still positioning the anchors for the sea curtain. I was rushing around like crazy till just after lunch, and now everything's just gone, ugh. That's really frustrating.
Why? What?
Well, nothing's happening. Look at this thing. It took them hours to blow this up, and it's just been sitting in the water forever.
Well, look, no, I mean, I disagree with you. I mean, I know it's disappointing. I want to go and see this boat, don't get me wrong. I mean, it looks like at least I've got my feet in the water. But, I mean, look, this is a difficult exercise. A lot of it is experimental. That has never been tried before. So, I mean, we've got to get it out there, we've got to test it, and we can't run it until we've done all this.
The first people to investigate the wreck were the Victorians, who thought the Grace Dieu was a huge Viking ship because her hull was clinker-built. This was an ancient technique using horizontal overlapping boards, still used today in small boats. The wreck diggers noticed the old ship's hull was made up of not one, but 3 planks of oak fastened together with huge ship's nails. Nothing like this had ever been seen before, and not surprisingly, archaeologists since have been asking questions.
232 in the main, all functioning correctly. Ready to hat the diver. You happy, Phil?
I am overjoyed. I can't tell you how long I've waited for this. Good.
It's mid-afternoon on day 2, and Phil's moment has finally come.
You happy?
I am absolutely happy.
Diver 2 ready to enter the water.
But there's a problem. John hasn't been able to secure the sea curtain to the river bed properly, and the water exchange isn't working. So Phil's going to have to take a chance with the visibility. Tony to Phil, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Tony.
What's it like down there?
Like a pea souper, actually.
Can you see anything of the boat?
You've got to bear with me, Tony, because I cannot see a single thing.
What can you feel?
There it is, now that makes sense. And that is, unquestionably, Grace Dieu.
These are really tough conditions even for the most experienced divers. And a scarf joint. One of the main tasks today is to establish the length of the boards that form the clinker hull. Colin McEwen, who's diving with Phil at the moment, is measuring one of the hull planks.
Right, could you just give me a measurement from the scarf joint at the end that's free back to the farthest point away that you can get? Okay. Understood?
Yeah, understood. Topside, diver 1.
Side.
Can you tell John the plank is 2.43 metres long?
This is a new discovery. Everyone thought the ship had been built using boards no longer than 2 metres.
2.43, roger that.
But now the moment has come. As I get closer, I'm trying to imagine all those medieval shipwrights putting her together. Why those mutinous sailors abandoned her. Maybe she wasn't struck by lightning.
Phil to Tony, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Are you as amazed as you should be?
It's really fantastic. When I first got down, the visibility was just like being in a swimming pool. But there's so much of it here, Phil.
I know, it just seems so bizarre. I mean, we two who've actually
Seen it are giggling and bubbling to us over a couple of idiots.
Phil's absolutely right. You can't possibly tell how big she is until you get down here. Now I can see for myself the massive frame timbers, with the side of the ship disappearing away. The ballast, I assume, as there's no other reason for flints to be in here. And until you see how close together these enormous timbers are that step down towards the stern, you can't appreciate the scale of this ship. The Grace Dieu heralded the end of the great clinker ships. By the time Henry VIII launched the Mary Rose nearly 100 years later, The old clinker technology had given way to a radically different carvel design, using parallel boards fixed edge to edge onto a rigid frame. This morning, Francis and Stuart started to look for the medieval shoreline in Bursledon. One of their targets was the remains of a storehouse near the old dried-up creek.
This is the storehouse. We've gone down and we've hit lots of rocks. And I think these are footings for walls or something like that. We don't know what date they are. But next door, right, dug a little hole and came up with this. Now that makes me very excited. It's a bit of pottery dated about 1450. So that is right on the money for the grasture. And then we've also found in that trench a large-headed nail that could be something to do with ships, but we don't know for sure yet.
What does it tell us?
Well, what it tells us is what Bursledon is in the late 15th century. Bursledon seems to be, I think we're right in our original assumptions, between there and just beyond the main road which exists today. So that's the Bursledon of the 16th century with the creek out in front of it.
So if Stuart's right, this dried-up creek just by the church could have been at the heart of medieval Bursledon and the centre of a royal shipbuilding business which would grow and diversify for centuries to come, or at least until the railways came along. Carenza has discovered that the practicalities of building the Grâce-Dieu were astounding. It's a remarkable testament to the courage and ambition of those medieval shipwrights.
I mean, what's really struck me is the sheer quantities of everything that was required to build it. I mean, there's thousands of gallons of tar and pitch are needed to waterproof it, 38 tons of rope for the sails, never mind anything else for the sails. There's 23 tons of iron required to make 52,000 pounds of nails. That's just the nails on the ship.
And that's without the acres of timber that you need to hold together.
I mean, the figures for that are unbelievable, aren't they? 2,735 oak trees, 1,145 beech trees. That doesn't include all the timber that came from abroad.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, some of it came from the Baltic. You've got wainscot boards, and you've got rigols, which are timber from Riga, and you've got Prussian deal, which again is all from the Baltic, coming into the East Coast ports here.
And then there's the fitting out, the anchors. It's got 24 anchors, and the largest one is 17 feet high.
That anchor had a name. It was called Tinctor, and it survives in the royal accounts right up to the time of Henry VII.
Over the 3 days, we've discovered a lot more about the Grâce-Dieu. From the sonar geophysics, we think that she measured about 120 feet long at the keel. And when you take into account the overhanging bow and stern, she was probably longer than 200 feet. And there's no doubt that she was very broad, over 50 feet at the widest point. John's discovered a lot of new technical information, from the length of the hull planking to the sizes and arrangement of the stern timbers. As a ship, we can't say if she was a success or a failure, because through no fault of her own, the Grâce-Dieu was a battleship without a war. There's no doubt that if she'd gone out in anger, she could have overpowered her enemies, but would she have lasted the ravages of the wind and the sea? That we shall never know.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
This residential estate is in the heart of the Surrey commuter belt. It's typical of the success, wealth and show of the modern age. And in the middle of it is this tower, which is typical of the success, wealth and show of the Tudor period. But it's also the tip of an archaeological iceberg, because if you look at this really old drawing, you can see that the tower is the gateway to a lavish palace, which was once owned by some of the wealthiest men in the country, the bishops of Winchester. It's a palace that was once so admired that King Henry VIII literally stole one of the buildings. So how much of it survives under these beautifully manicured lawns? And how many of these gardens would it have once covered? The palace has been lost for over 300 years. We've got just 3 days to find it. In the front garden, where we're trying to find out if there was a defensive wall, Jonathan and Matt have hit on archaeology.
Fine mortar.
That's like it was 18th century.
Might well be 18th century, actually. Yeah, I'd be looking for bigger chunks of chalk knocked together with some little dark flecks.
Yeah.
So my guess would be you're talking about 18th century demolition.
Yeah.
We haven't found the wall yet, but Stuart's had a look at the early plan and he's convinced it holds the key to Waynflete's palace.
This map, which is produced by Ralph Treswell, is a spectacularly informative map.
Yes, I've seen a blow-up of just that tiny space.
Yeah, it includes a phenomenal amount of detail in the buildings, and it's actually a measured survey. Although the buildings are drawn as if they're a bird's eye view, the way this was made was to make a plan and then draw the buildings on afterwards.
It must be one of the very first measured maps then.
It is. I think there are a lot of clues on this map. I mean, this is a real gem to work with.
So this early plan is a great starting point to search for Waynflete's palace. It shows Penny's Tower as the gateway to the complex, with a possible defensive wall coming off the side. The mysterious chapel lies to the south. There's a keep in the next door garden, and a large building, possibly a great hall, immediately in front of the gatehouse. So Phil and the diggers begin to open a trench in the back garden in order to test John's geophys and tie down the buildings. And in nearby Esher Place, we've set up an incident room where the rest of the team are busy trying to uncover clues about Waynflete's master plan. Historian John Guy and our own Helen Geek are trawling through the records of the bishops of Winchester.
By 1301, we know that 2 carpenters were hired for mending the Great Gate.
They're trying to find anything which might throw light on the development of the palace and Waynflete's building activity.
So where does this information come from?
It comes from the bishop's pipe rolls. They're called pipe rolls because they were long membranes of parchment, and then they were bound together at the top and then rolled up around the equivalent of a rolling pin.
So they looked a bit like cylindrical pipes?
That's right. But what these contain, Helen, is not, if you like, major building works, only repairs. The infuriating thing is that the major building work is on a separate roll and those rolls are lost.
So if we know about this, can we look up in the pipe rolls about what Waynflete's doing in the 15th century?
We hope so. But this is really what we have to do in the next 3 days, to actually plough through all these Latin entries and see what we can find.
Oh gosh, how is your medieval Latin?
Well, I've got my dictionary.
In the front garden, Bridge has been working on the wall trench for most of the day.
How you getting on then, Bridge?
Well, we're getting down, Mick.
Doesn't look very interesting.
No, it's not really. We have a little bit, but it all seems to be out of situ, and we're just going through lots of garden soil and demolition layers, and that's really about it.
Right.
My biggest concern at the moment is, I found this 1912 map here.
Right.
Of the excavations done then. You can see this is foundations of brick for brick wall of Waynflete's times, with a little note here saying foundations are over 6 foot below the present surface.
Yeah, but is that the top or the bottom of the foundations?
Well, my pick is it's going to be the top.
Either way, Jonathan, it's a long way down, isn't it, to what we've got here?
It is. And the wall, if you look at the scar on the tower at the moment, should run through about here.
Right. OK, so let's dig
it.
the trench with the machine.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get that far and then think about it again. Yeah?
OK.
So Bridge and Matt will have to dig a lot deeper to find the wall. But in the back garden, Phil's keen to know whether he's found the first clues to the buildings on the early plan and hopefully Waynflete's palace.
Faye, I think I've got something here that might interest you.
These are brilliant. The glazing, it's a Tudor floor tile.
A Tudor?
Yeah, so it dates from about 1500s onwards.
Now, hang on, Jonathan. I thought you said this morning this place was pre-Tudor.
Yeah, well, now, the gatehouse that survives is, but this has been a manor of the bishops of Winchester since the early 13th century. So Waynflete wasn't the first builder, and he certainly wasn't the last. And for these, it could easily be someone like the bishop of the first half of Henry VIII's reign, who was Richard Fox, another great builder in line.
It's nearly the end of day one. And although Phil's finding building material, it's later than Waynflete. And I'm getting worried that we're not any closer to understanding the rest of his magnificent palace. Well, mate, this trench was a bit of a disaster. We've been digging all day and we've still down on nothing.
No, it hasn't at all. We're still working on it. You're always like that at the end of day one. You're always a real misery at the end of day one. We need to do a lot more work in this trench and the same in the other two in there. We're hardly down on the archaeology at all. But also, there's the geophysics of the whole garden, which seems to show some sort of big building, probably a hall. We need to look at that. And then, of course, there's the other gardens, and the one in that direction has got this thing that looks like a big chapel in it. So we can have a look at that as well.
What about the documents?
I've had a great day, Tony. I've found all sorts of interesting documents about the things that were happening here, but I've also found an account of an exorcism in the buildings that were over there, which actually adds to what we know about the arrangement of the rooms.
Excellent. So tomorrow, a hall, a chapel, maybe even an exorcism. That should raise our spirits. It's a joke. End of day one, it's a joke. Am I allowed to finish on a joke? Beginning of day two here in Esher, where we're looking for the rest of the palace to go with that magnificent gateway. And yesterday we got some pretty good clues in Penny's back garden. But one of the buildings that we're looking for is this chapel-y thing, which would have been on this end. And that's not going to be in Penny's place at all, but in one of these back gardens. The chapel-y thing is just one of the palace buildings which once lined the banks of the River Mole, and it's shown clearly on the early plan to the south of the palace. We've compared the plan with the modern estate, and we think this building stood 2 doors down from Penny's tower. So we've begun to geophys in this back garden to see if any of the structure remains and find out whether it was Waynflete's chapel. Waynflete's power extended way beyond the bishopric. He was a great educationalist, headmaster of Winchester, provost of Eton, and built Magdalen College, Oxford. Back at the tower, and Phil's got a captive audience as Penny and her children check up on his progress in her garden. I might be digging up your past. In her front garden, we're trying to establish whether Waynflete built a defence round the palace.
Have you got this wall yet, Matt?
Not quite, Mick, and you can see we're getting pretty deep now.
Yeah, it's got water in the bottom, I see.
It has got water in the bottom, but according to the 1912 map, we're still about 6 inches off.
You've got a big block of stone in there, there's all the way along there, that comes in there. I mean, I was wondering whether this isn't the earliest wall we got on the site. It's just complicated, very, very complicated.
While Phil struggles with too many walls and Matt struggles to find one, Jonathan's taken me to nearby Hampton Court. Just over 3 miles away, Hampton Court was built by one-time Esher resident Cardinal Wolsey, and Jonathan wants to show me just how much it owes to Waynflete. What's the date of this place?
January 1515 is when Wolsey's carpenters and masons turned up and the materials poured in for Hampton Court. But at that time, when it was a building site, he lived on Waynflete's manor at Esher.
Really?
Oh, Waynflete's old house, anyway.
So every morning when he came in, he'd got that image of Esher in his mind?
Absolutely he did.
You can certainly see Waynflete's influence in these diamond patterns and in the look of the brickwork.
You can, Tony, but look carefully at them and see the way in which they don't really line up. They're all over the place. Now, Waynflete's masons set that diaper work perfectly. It's very organised on the facade. It's tightly built.
It's a kind of relief to know that even Cardinal Wolsey had problems with his build, isn't it?
Got these responses here. Now, they're actually in this area.
Where this sort of little bit
where
of
we've got the
drop-off
ridge.
is over
We've got
here.
high readings down there that might just be make-up for the river. But I'd have thought if we put a trench across here, then we can investigate what that is.
Yeah, perhaps a 2x2 or something like that. Or something across here.
Just small to start with.
To see
I
what
mean,
we've
we
got,
don't want to wreck the garden totally, do we?
Yeah, OK, let's do that then. Mark it out for us. Yep.
Then a swim?
Only if it warms up a bit.
After a day and a half in Penny's front garden, Matt might finally have made a breakthrough in the wall trench.
Hold it there for a second, Ian. Think. There we go. Oh, without a doubt. Ah, and there's a course down there as well. That's the other side there.
Brilliant.
Definitely. So we've got one bit there, and one part of the wall there. So what am I standing on here?
Matt seems to have hit a brick wall in more ways than one. While in the neighbouring garden, things are just getting started, as Kerry opens a trench to search for the chapel-y structure. And in Penny's back garden, Rakshas opened another trench based on John's geophys results, which showed a large building, possibly a great hall. Now, Phil's cleaned up the walls in his trench. He's pretty sure he's found part of it.
If this is the Great Hall coming along like this, geophysics says that it doesn't run the other side of the path.
Right.
So if this is the corner of the hall, I'd like to resolve whether or not it turns this way.
Yeah.
If it's absent from there, we know that the hall has got to be this way and not that way. Or in other words, whether we got the front corner or a back corner.
Good. Very good.
Keen to solve this puzzle, Phil and Jonathan want to know whether Rakshas trench holds any clues.
Raksha.
Oh, hello.
How are you doing on?
Doing very well, actually. We've got this wall running down here, and it's composed of the similar material that Phil has in his trench. We have something coming up this side, which is composed of flint and mortar. I can't really see what's going on because I think we need to extend that way. And then we have this floor running through here, and I'm wondering whether it's a corridor or not.
Is there any chance that you're walking on a floor that's made up of bits of rubble and cement or mortar that would have had tile on the top of it?
Yeah, it's possible. We had lots of tile coming out of the demolition layer.
Because that wall looks a lot like your...
Well, that's the obvious thing. It's exactly the same composition as the wall I got running parallel to it, and it's also the same composition or the one that looks as though it's coming parallel to the pathway. What sort of distance we got?
Well, let's measure it out, Phil.
Well,
You've got a tape.
Never mind about tapes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
10. About 10 metres.
Well, that's 30 foot, isn't it? It's just over 30 foot. So that's exactly right for a great hall. Yeah, absolutely. I like that. Bang on typical. Nice.
So we've found the Great Hall, which ties in perfectly with our plan, and it must have been part of Waynflete's palace. The hall's made of stone, so would have been built earlier than the brick gatehouse. We've also located a wall in the front garden. It's made of brick, but is it Waynflete?
Hey, Jonathan, come and look at this lot.
Mate, I can have a nose. Yeah, come in.
This is all getting very, very complicated now, look.
You've got 2 walls going on.
We've got the first wall here.
Yeah.
It's lovely flat face down to there, and from there downwards is the slightly more messy foundation. And also appears there's been a drain cut through it there. We carried on back, there's rubble. So either the wall has collapsed down here, like that, or it could be the beginning of a culvert which came up like that. Then we hit another wall, or in fact it's more of a large plinth with a kind of triangular feature on top, which seems to have a couple of bricks heading off in that direction.
Jonathan, I'm going to leave you to carry on with this, and I'll come back later when you've sorted it out, all right?
See you then, Mick.
As the archaeologists try to date the wall, Mick the Twig's busy working on his wood samples, trying to find a precise date for the tower. Bridge is casting an expert eye over a coin we found. And historian John Guy is ploughing through the records, searching for evidence of Waynflete's building project. And by the tower, there's been another find.
Stuart, Penny's done some great research, and she pulled out this plan from the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and it's by John Aubrey, the surveyor.
I think it's a great plan. So I've been able to spend a little bit of time looking at it. There's the gatehouse there, there's your wall. But also, there's this, the Tower Keep, which is probably the most important building on the site. I couldn't stop playing once I got my teeth into this. And I've put it against the modern map. There's the gatehouse there, there's your wall, that's where the keep is, and the majority of it is in next door's garden. What this basically means and tells us is that the most important building on the site is actually just behind these trees here. We might just be able to get a bit of it.
Can we dig it?
Well, I think there's enough room to get in there. There's a strip down here we could dig in, but I think the majority is kind of, over there.
We might be able to unearth a key building on the early plan, a whole castle keep. And it's a great opportunity to discover whether or not Waynflete was building with defence in mind. And as digging starts, I've heard that Mick the Twig might have some news for us.
Hello, you two. Dendrodate, what is it? I don't know. He won't tell me. He's been very secretive.
You are such a tease.
No, Tony, you had to be here for this. I've actually got to eat humble pie. Here was me saying this wood was absolutely useless.
Yeah.
And I've got
And
to
the
say,
rest.
And the rest, which yes. Well, actually, I've actually got to tell you that I've managed to get a date out of it. And what we've managed to do is get the date range down to 1462 to 1472.
Fantastic. It's pre-Farnham.
Absolutely.
It's pre-Hampton Court and it's pre-Farnham. That's wonderful. I'm so pleased.
This is undisguised triumph. It's not a competition.
There you go, you can have that.
Oh, I can't believe it.
Well, Penny seems to be pleased. Not bad going for day 2, but will Mixed Dendro help us understand Wainfleet's palace? The Dendro date. 1462 to 1472.
Oh, that's nice. That's very nice,
isn't it?
Yeah.
But when Penny heard, she went, "It's earlier than Farnham." Triumph.
Very good.
Well, it makes a lot of sense too. Wainfleet opens Parliament in 1459 with an impassioned speech of "Let peace and unity be amongst you all," because we're in the Wars of the Roses, aren't we, at that date?
Yeah.
And in 61, his fears are realised because he's besieged in his own house at East Meon. So to make a castle-like palace from 1462 makes a lot of sense to me.
But do we have anything archaeological that marries with that kind of date?
Ah, well, look at this. This is a silver coin from the demolition of the hall.
Yeah.
It's an Irish penny of Edward IV. And these are really quite uncommon because they're not supposed to circulate in England because they're lightweight, and this one's been clipped terribly anyway, and it dates to 1473 to 8.
Very close, isn't it?
That's very good, isn't it?
Mick, what about what I've been referring to all day as the chapel-y type thing on the edge of the complex? Is it a chapel?
I would doubt it. I would need a lot of convincing, actually. I can't see a big freestanding chapel like that.
OK, so we're thinking at the moment probably not chapel. Is there anything that we can be sure about in terms of what buildings we use for what?
Well, I think we've actually got a keep, a castle-like keep. John Aubrey in 1673 describes things as being castle-like.
And that 1606 map seems to show that in one corner.
It does, and his plan shows a thing here which looks like a square keep with turrets on the corners, just like a castle.
Beginning of day 3 here in Penny's back garden in Esher, where we were looking for Esher Palace, except now we think that at least some of the time it had a much more defensive function, maybe something more like Esher Castle. And this being day 3, some of our lads have been here since 7 o'clock this morning because they think that in these trees somewhere there might be a really important, significant trench. Actually, it's more like a badger in here, I think. They reckon, thank you, that there could be the keep in there. Although yesterday you said that the majority of the keep was in the next garden, so why is this so important?
Yeah, that's right, the majority of the keep is in the next garden. It's just possible that this strip down here might be within Penny's garden, but the majority is in the other garden.
There's no doubt about it. Look, that's the survey next door. You can see the keep quite clearly. This dotted line is the avenue of trees behind us, and the keep extends across here.
So you haven't been able to geophys behind the trees?
No, but it extends round like that.
So could these red bits actually be the tip of the keep?
Yeah, and we're digging in here.
It's looking good.
Yeah.
We've made loads of progress. There's a great hall opposite Penny's gatehouse. We've found a wall, though we're not sure how it fits into Wainfleet's grand scheme. And now we've got the chance to discover and date a whole castle keep. The site's now a hive of activity. Bridge is busily digging in our chapel-y trench, and the diggers continue their early morning efforts on the keep trench. I'm keen to see how the great hall fits together in Penny's back garden, so Jonathan's giving me a guided tour.
Raksha is on the other side, picking up on the geophysics. It was very clear. And there is another piece of ironstone masonry. That's the other side of the hall.
So what's the logic of that? Why is it here like this?
Well, you see, nothing should impede the relationship of the gatehouse to the hall because you need to be guided through to the entrance to the whole complex.
OK, so I come through the gatehouse.
Yeah, and the hall is the assembly space. So come with me, you're now walking through the porch and you've gone through Raksha's wall, you're into the hall now. There's the kitchens over there, they're knocking up dinner for you. This is where you as a bishop, Bishop Tony, have a court, you have retainers, you have staff. This is basically your staff canteen and big reception space. It's an all-in-one, multifunctional extravaganza.
So I come in here?
Yeah, so through the timber screen, and Aubrey describes a roof here with angels holding up shields. Fabulous vision and bits of stained glass. So from the south, the stained glass will shine through on a platform at the far end where the bishop sits, presiding over everyone. Now, when he's finished his meal, he's going to go up his stairs. Off he goes. There's bishop, warmth, bed, comfort. Far end, there's the kitchen's noise, dirt, smell, danger. The hall separates everything out into servant's end and posh.
Well, that's that bit sorted out. Let's go on to the next
Let's have a
bit.
look.
So not only have we identified the Great Hall, but thanks to documents, we've got an idea what it looked like inside. We found the hall, and the keep trench looks very promising.
Penny, we're looking for the last piece of the jigsaw. You know, we've got the hall. The really big thing that we're looking for is the keep. That's why we're digging in amongst the trees, and we think that this brick wall might actually be the wall of the keep.
Oh. Look.
Oh! Amazing! That's just brilliant. So what would have been in that turret? Another staircase, or?
I don't know. What have you got? What have you got in your, what have you got in your turrets?
A spiral staircase.
Well, probably a good bet then that you got a spiral staircase.
Amazing.
But that has got to be the key. That is splaying out. You've got the castle. You've got the keep in your garden.
Have you sorted this yet, you chaps?
It's been a breakthrough, Mick.
Oh, I like breakthroughs, that's good.
We have got, can you see down here? See the brick floor here, which joins up this wall and this wall.
Ah.
So they were definitely contemporary.
Right. So does that help us, Jonathan, in explaining what it is?
It does. If you're standing in what's a passageway,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And this is a pier there, so that a column of brickwork rose from it.
Right.
This ties in exactly with what John Aubrey shows in his 1670s survey of this being a whole arcaded wall with a terrace on top. And that explains the bulk.
So we're underneath it here.
Exactly. You're just outside the wall.
Yeah.
Matt is under the terrace, and so about 5 feet over our head would have been a walkway. You see?
Right.
Now, I've been looking at the bricks. Yesterday, all I had to go on was the standard brick size that looked like Wainfleet was using on the tower. Well, that's 9 to 9.5 inches by about 4.5.
Yeah.
But these go from 9.5 up to 10. So actually, the brick, you can't make a typology here. So we've got to look at another way of reading this. And the way to do it is to follow this terraced wall and see what its relationship is with the gatehouse.
So we've got to look at the gatehouse now.
Here's what's going to hold the info, yep.
Right.
So, Mick, the bricks are all over the place. We're not
Yeah.
going to learn much from them. So the building's got to speak to us. Now, that feature up there.
Yeah. Well, it's a window.
It's a window now, isn't it? But what about the proportion?
Ah, it's more like a doorway, isn't it?
It is, too.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
is. Did Wainfleet have that door put in, or is it later?
Well, there's no ragged hole round it. It's contemporary with the tower, isn't it?
Absolutely. But now it goes out onto thin air. If it is a two-storey wall, there should be some way of getting to the underside of it.
That's rather good, isn't it? Yeah.
So we should find some means of getting into it from the stair turret. Look at this, Mick.
Ah, yes, I noticed this.
But it makes a lot more sense now.
Yes,
because it's bang on line with Matt's trench.
Yeah.
If the stairs once carried round, you might have the option of going up or down, but that would lead you down to the underside of that double-decker wall outside.
So that's the lower doorway.
Yeah. That's right, but up the stairs here, look, let's see how that window was once... Look, it's a door.
Now, you've even got one of the pintles of the door left, look, in the wall there.
Oh, yeah. There's a flipping lock. Look, catch plate down there.
Well, that all makes a lot more sense now,
Doesn't it? So we'd walk out there onto the top level of a big arched wall, maybe with crenellations on the top, and it does feel like something of a castle defence, doesn't it?
Yeah. That's brilliant, that is. It all makes sense.
So we've found our defensive wall of 2 levels with a covered walkway on top. And what's more, it's pure Wainfleet.
Well, this is one of the most amazing things I've seen on Time Team. This is a corner of a vast brick keep that must have accompanied the gatehouse. And it's Wainfleet's character of building. And this should have been his lodgings.
And the whole arrangement would have been impressive, wouldn't it? You know, you imagine coming through the big brick gatehouse into a courtyard, and no sooner have you got past that that's impressive, You get into a courtyard out here, and there in front of you is an even bigger brick tower.
When you come through the gatehouse that he's built, he has a 2-storey wall with a terrace on the top. He's got his own private link between the gatehouse and his lodgings, because that's what this is all about. It's smart lodgings in a place that looks like a defensible castle.
What's the relationship of this keep with the Great Hall? Does he live in both of them, or does he live in one of them?
I think it depends on whether he's visiting here as a stopping off route, on his way to London, or whether he's having visitors here, because if he needs to entertain, then he's going to be in the hall and retreat to the lodging. If he's on his own, he may as well just walk through the gatehouse and lock himself in his room.
The hall's a big display place, isn't it? Where, you have feasting, you show off how wealthy you are, how much food you've got, and so on. He's not going to do that if he's just going to come in for a pint and a sandwich on the way on the journey.
Well, it's the perfect end to our 3 days in Esher. A major brick-built palace that had been lost for 300 years.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
In 1534, Henry VIII visited this manor house in Buckinghamshire, the first of many visits by the king and his daughter Elizabeth. But the owner knew that the royals expected only the biggest and the best, so he had his home transformed into a palace. But magnificent though this Tudor building is, it's hardly big enough to support the king and his entourage of over 300 courtiers. It must have been at least twice this big. So where's the rest of it? And what exactly does it take to build a house fit for a king? As usual, we've got just 3 days to find out. A historical document mentions a wing measuring 9 chambers from the church to a gatehouse. This could either run along the north or the east of the courtyard, with either one containing the grand gatehouse entrance. Jonathan's preferred option is 2 wings with the gatehouse to the east, giving us a palace large enough for a king and his entourage.
We're talking about a house that Henry VIII visited, and Elizabeth, up to 1,000 people descending on it for periods up to a couple of weeks or more. It must have been a very big complex with lots of supporting structures. So my neat vision might be much more complex in reality.
Mick, how do we explode Jonathan's cosy vision of what this place would have looked like?
Well, I think we can look, the 2 wings that are on there that don't exist today, we can have a look at those by putting some trenches across and see if there is any walls in the bottom of them. But of course, the building itself is a piece of archaeology, and it's full, just by looking around the outside, of clues of where walls have joined on, windows have been altered. So there's a sort of 3-dimensional jigsaw to sort out of the building itself,
Absolutely
isn't
there is, yeah.
I want to know what the difference is going to be between this painting and what we finally come up with.
Let's get on then.
And so our first trench goes in based on Jonathan's recreation. Here on the proposed eastern wing, close to where he believes there was a grand gatehouse. You're a bit previous, aren't you? We haven't even got the geophys results yet.
Yeah, but I don't think it'll matter, actually. We've got a lot of clues as to what might be going on here. We know about these 2 wings. We can see where that step is there by the fire alarm.
There's different sorts of brickwork there, aren't there?
There's all sorts of stuff going on. We're going to have to spend a lot of time looking at that, because for now it just tells us something's coming off in this direction.
As well as rediscovering this structure and the rest of the palace, we hope to find out why much of this complex disappeared over the centuries. Because historical records show it was large and grand enough to play host to Henry 3 times and Elizabeth twice, a place where they and their entourage could rest, feast and hunt. The house's high status was due to one man, the first Earl of Bedford, John Russell, who had a meteoric rise through the Tudor court.
He was in the service of a man called Sir Richard Jerningham, who was one of Wolsey's key officials. Now, what's important about that is that when Jerningham died, Sir John Russell not only, if you like, stepped into Jerningham's job, he also stepped into his bed, he married his widow.
That was Anne Sapcott, who inherited Chenies.
And that's how he got Chenies. But that coincided with Henry VIII taking Russell into the Privy Chamber. He was a gentleman of the Privy Chamber in 1526. Now, he was one of only 8 people in the country who were allowed to touch the king, and even one of those 8, the barber, was only allowed to touch him when the king specifically invited him to do so. So Russell is one of those very key courtiers at the very heart of the Tudor court.
So really you could say that Russell was one of the 8 most important men in the country at that time.
Absolutely. Now, but what Henry also does is he gives him a wedding present, and he gives him the Manor of Amersham next door, and that gives him the money to build at Chenies.
Oh, crikey,
You
yeah,
see
look at
It
that.
looks like we've got... See that? There's a mortar surface there.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's the holes in the ground that will confirm or sink Jonathan's theory.
You must be inside a building.
Hang on, why do you say that that's a floor?
It's a laid mortar surface. It's very compact. It's evenly distributed. It's laid on these bits of these brick surface. It may have had a tiled floor actually on the top of it, which they lifted off. But that, what you're looking at is actual foundation surface for a floor, I think.
And they've got something else over there, haven't they?
Now this is really the good stuff. Look, we've got these mortared bricks in here, but look, it's bang on line with the end of the wing.
Lines up
Just
exactly,
where we want
doesn't
it to be.
Why couldn't that be 21st century?
It could be. I mean, there's still a lot of demolition rubble about it, but that looks to me Tudorish. I mean, one piece of pot does not make a period.
Yeah.
But I would have thought we could be looking at that sort of period.
It's almost like that Cistercian ware, isn't it? Which is that sort of very dark green stuff, you know. Yeah, I think it's right.
Well, there's our first bit of Tudor.
Jolly good.
Early days yet, Tony?
Yeah.
The evidence does suggest this wall is Tudor, which, going by Jonathan's theory, means we should be close to the sort of grand gatehouse you'd expect at the entrance to a royal residence. But just as one piece of pot doesn't make a period, one wall doesn't make a wing. So we're putting in another trench to find the other side of our possible gatehouse wing. Trench 2 has also come up with the goods, and it's even more substantial than the wall in Phil's trench.
Okay, well that's wallish, isn't it?
Very wallish. Got the wall up here, and we've even got some flint footings, which, you know...
Fairly typical, aren't they? Local resources, chalk and flint.
Absolutely.
Good stuff. Good for the Chilterns, yeah.
Not only does this feature line up with the existing Tudor wall by the church, there's even some traces of plaster on it, suggesting this could be the inside of our northern wing.
Here's our Tudor wall, and that does line up exactly on the end of the building. We still don't really know whether we are in a building or, as this material here, this gravel material, might suggest that we're actually into a courtyard surface. The other problem, of course, is that we've got these walls here, and we don't know, again, whether they're a building or whether they're garden features. The trouble is that they've been so smashed around that we got no idea where the floor levels were. We've got the Tudor wall there coming off. Now, what we don't know is whether it's a building, a structure, or whether it's just a boundary wall.
If we go back a little bit, what we're starting to see is a wall running flush, so it's more like a boundary wall. If we go back even further, it shows even clearer this strong wall all the way running across the front.
It does suggest that that wall is no more than a boundary wall rather than a structure.
Yeah, you can't really see any structures.
It's still a bit confusing.
It is, isn't it? I mean, I'd like a painting from the other side.
That's yeah. You haven't got one of those?
No, not at all.
We just don't have any evidence here to back up Jonathan's original theory for a gatehouse. Although the wall may once have been part of a larger wooden structure, for example, a gallery leading to the church. But it does mean our straightforward plan for this site is unravelling in front of our eyes. Hopefully this trench behind the garden wall will find the other side of the northern wing. But just to confuse matters, geophys have discovered these anomalies in the courtyard, suggesting 2 completely different shapes and sizes of that northern wing. And that means we'll need to dig 2 more trenches to test their results. And if that's not complicated enough, we seem to have lost the east wing entirely. The Archaeology and Archives now suggesting it was just a boundary wall. In the midst of all this contradiction and confusion, Stuart has been fertling around the site in his own inimitable fashion. And he now believes these massive earthworks to the north of the site could be the remains of the formal Tudor gardens.
It's got mortar in it, hasn't it? Are there any bricks in it anywhere?
There is a little bit further up. We've got brickwork.
Slowly but surely, Stuart's evolving his own very different theory as to the whereabouts of the Grand Palace. Plus, the records show it was also at the very heart of a royal scandal.
Henry was showing off Catherine Howard. She was his trophy wife. He wanted everybody to see her. I mean, the irony is, of course, that a week later, she is denounced for adultery. And in fact, there is also evidence in the National Archives that while at Chenies, you know, she was engaged in a liaison with Thomas Culpeper.
Oh, really? Actually here?
Absolutely here, yes, because the evidence against her actually mentions Chenies.
If you're approaching from that direction, you're going to approach from the back end of the church.
Yeah.
That's going to be the first thing you see, the rear of it.
Yeah.
And why would you want to approach from the back of the church? It seems just to turn its back on everything. You want to celebrate this building.
It's halfway through day 2, and we've got almost nothing to show for it. But that suddenly changes when we get the dendro dates for the west and south wings.
This bit here comes much later, in the summer of 1550.
Hang on, whoa. When did Henry VIII come and stay here?
1540, 34 and 41.
41.
And we've been
this isn't even Henry
assuming...
VIII's reign. This is not part of Henry VIII's reign in that case.
We've been assuming that this is the constant. This is the reason that we came here, because we'd got a bit of the place where Henry VIII stayed.
So the building is elsewhere?
Yeah, the buildings that Henry saw
are elsewhere.
Although he did see this one behind me.
So this wing on which we've based so much of our digging strategy wasn't even built until after Henry VIII's death. And that means we can turn this dig on its head, distilling a new layout for the house. And this is it. With the main entrance to the west and a grand set of lodgings to the north overlooking terraced gardens, which is where our new trench will go in. Unfortunately, it's in the most inappropriate spot on the whole site, jammed in between a wall and our portable toilets. Ah, the glamour of archaeology. Our new plan may be causing headaches for the archaeologists, but it's completely transformed our understanding of the archives.
This is a cracking piece of archaeology, isn't it?
Thank you, Mick.
It really is. Do we understand it now?
I think we actually do. I think what you're looking at here is the front facade of the Royal Lodges. We think it's actually built in probably 2 phases. They put up one skin of bricks and then added. But the most obvious thing are these 2 bay windows, one there and one over there, which they've actually added on to the front of the building.
So it's got a whole series of glass windows up the front of it.
It really shows how important this is. And we checked this out. It could have been a garderobe. Turns out that, in fact, it is just a massive bay window.
Yeah, we've had glass out of here as well.
Oh,
so
right.
Anyway, once we come into the building, we've got a room on that side and a room on that side.
So a partition wall down the middle.
Well, it's more than a partition. Look at the size of it. Look at the foundations.
It's as big as the outer wall, isn't it?
And you see here, look, you see we've got a whole series of these little niches cut into that wall. Now, I reckon that's where the flooring joist would have been. So if you allow for the flooring joist and allow for the floorboards on the top, I reckon that floor level is about here and you would have looked out down over the valley.
So it would work out to be about 30 foot in depth, and you could say it is literally palatial.
We may not have found a Tudor ensuite bathroom, but these remains show the sheer scale of the apartments that would have greeted the royal entourage. This new layout has got one final treat in store for us. After careful measurement and cross-referencing with the 1585 inventory, it seems we may have stumbled across the bedchamber of a certain Henry VIII.
By 1541, when Henry came here, he had a badly ulcerated leg, and he wasn't as mobile. And in fact, he would have stayed in this building on the ground floor, not the first floor, as a monarch would normally have done.
Where's that?
Well, we think that because when Henry VIII's bed was actually given away by the second Earl of Bedford in 1585, it was actually on the lower floor, in the lower chamber. Now, the royal bed was absolutely huge. You didn't just bring it into the room, it was probably built inside the room and wouldn't go out through the door.
It's bizarre, isn't it, that we're in this old bus, and yet at some time in history, King Henry VIII might have been just here, gazing out into the garden with his separated leg.
Well, I think that's entirely possible.
And this would have been just one small part of the fair lodgings that Sir John Russell had built for his royal visitors. because wedged between the dining bus and the portable toilets, geophys have been able to confirm Stuart's suggested extent of the missing Tudor range.
As we get up to the line, there's a definite response where the front wall is.
We've got a clear demarcation there.
Right.
And that lines up perfectly.
Oh, excellent. That's
with the
Phil's
walls
excavation
in Phil's
walls,
trench
yeah.
going through there. Possible back wall at that point there, running through. Just this side of the bus.
Under the concrete.
So if we hadn't have parked the dining bus there, we might have been able to have a look at it.
And yet all that now remains of this grand palace is a beautiful fraction of its former glory. This is the story of a grand medieval house turned into a palace fit for a king. Its facade further embellished with modish and very impressive bay windows by the time of Queen Elizabeth's month-long stay in 1570. And dendrodating shows that by this time they'd also added another wing to the south of the complex. In every respect, this house reflects the very pinnacle of the power and wealth of the Earls of Bedford, its Tudor owners.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.